Let's talk about building culture within your organization. So, whether you're a smaller company, you've got 5 employees, or whether you're a larger organization and you've got 500,000 employees, culture is a word that has a definition. No matter what the consultants may tell you, or the people that you've paid millions of dollars to, or nothing to, have communicated to you, there is a definition of the word culture in the dictionary, and it simply means how people act when they're together. And I guess we'll add another layer to that. It's more really used to describe the perception of how people act when they're together. So, for example, let's say you and I go on a trip and we travel to a small town and we interact with the people there, and they're friendly and they're warm and they're sort of family oriented. We would leave that trip, and in our discussions as we're traveling home, we would say, geez, that was a very warm, friendly, family oriented town. That would be the way we would describe how those people act when they were together in that town. And we could also go a step further and say that would be a way to describe the culture that they've created when they're together in that town. So culture is all about how people act when they're together. And when we take that idea or concept and we bring it to work, we bring it to the workplace, which it has been done for quite some time, things have really fallen apart and gotten complicated, unnecessarily so. Culture is simply the way people act when they're together at work, as we're connecting it with work or workplaces, right? And it's the words that we would use to describe how people act when they're working. And that's really critically important as we're looking at, how do I shape culture? How do I build culture? Culture will get created either through neglect, doing nothing, and people will come to work and they'll act a certain way, or it can be done as a purposeful activity to drive people toward the culture you want to build. You certainly are not going to be successful in forcing people to feel a certain way, but feeling and culture are not the same thing. Culture, again, is simply the way that people act when they're together at work, and that can be shaped positively. I know for myself, because I did it at my old companies. I had a terrible culture. That's not any way to point the finger at the people that worked at my company. That was all me. I had a terrible culture. We had high turnover, and I decided as a lawyer to go look into this area, to like dive in, like, what is culture about? How do you build it? How do you create it? Like, what do you do to actually, shape that outcome that you want to achieve? And what I discovered was that if I simply sat down, which I did, and I wrote out, what are the words that I would want people to use when they meet the people that I work with, when they meet our company, when they come into our offices, when they're a new employee, when they're a client and they're interacting with our people, what are the words that I want people to use to describe us as a team? That's culture. What are the words that they would use to describe how we act, how we behave, how we operate? So, with that idea in mind, I started to write down a bunch of words, like the words that I really want us to embrace as a group. Being kind, caring, make things simple, understand, work hard, win, be thankful. And in some cases, it was multiple words, but it could be ideas or concepts. But these were the things that I wanted our people to embrace and really embody as they came to work and they were collaboratively getting projects done together. So I wrote these things down. I got with my teams, got with leaders, and I just decided, you know what, I'm going to pull a page out of, I think it's Amazon's playbook, where they actually connected core values, which is another way to describe these culture characteristics, or these words, the words that we use to describe something. We could call a characteristic. Characteristic is simply a word used to describe something, right? And I decided to jot these down, these characteristics or these words used to describe how we act. And a lot of times those are called core values. I didn't call them core values. I just chose not to. I called them culture characteristics, or the words that we would use to describe how we act at work, is often what I would say to our teams, just to simplify it, make sure everybody really got it. Like, hey, here's how we want to act when we're together as a team. Like, we want to be kind. And I connected each one of those. I came up with 10 initially, and then eventually 12. I connected each one of those with a month of the year. And then every single month we would spend time in our company get-togethers, because we would get together every Friday. And we would talk about that culture characteristic for that month. So if the month was be kind, we would, every Friday when we met, we would talk a little bit about how important it is to be kind, not as like a lecture, you need to do this, but as like a really a supported, warmly embraced, This is how we want to be as a group. And then most importantly, we connected those core values or culture characteristics back to the outcomes that we had achieved with our clients. And this is critically important. What we did is we would give examples and we would celebrate those examples of those times during that week or during that month that a group or a team had demonstrated kindness and how a client had positively responded to that, or a customer positively responded to that, or some positive outcome to celebrate positively the use of that characteristic, the embodiment of that characteristic, the demonstration of that core value, so that it was positively reinforced with the teams. We never used culture characteristics to punish or to lecture or to get on someone's ass about something. We never came in and used those to make somebody feel bad. It was always positive reinforcement, because if you're trying to create a culture, you're trying to create a way that your people act, you want that exercise, that information sharing. Hey, I'd love it if we acted thankful toward one another. I would love it if we all showed appreciation for each other, for our clients, for the vendors that we work with, for the society at large that we interact with. And if I go about that in a way that punishes people for not doing it, they're not likely to really reach for it or embrace it. But if I'm constantly celebrating, if I'm constantly rewarding, if I'm constantly talking about these positive outcomes that occur as a result of embodying these culture characteristics, people are much more likely to reach for them and actually want to embrace them and practice acting that way at work. So we're not changing people or the way that they are. What we're saying is that, hey, we as a team, this is the way we operate at work. And when we're at work, this is how we act. Like, you leave work, you can act however you want. That's totally fine. But at work, this is how we act as a team. This is the way that we operate. These are our core values. These are our culture characteristics. And by spending time to talk about them on a regular basis and then connecting them meaningfully to positive outcomes, people are much more likely to embrace them. So let's actually share a little bit about how that went. So I started off and I had no culture characteristics. Turnover was really high. Got them listed down, got those into the ears and in the minds of our people. Within a year, we were the number one ranked company to work for in the Pacific Northwest. I'm not saying that to brag. We had, it was just under 100 people. Like, we were somewhere between 50 and 100. So decent size, but not like huge. And we continued to grow as we pushed our way up towards 200 people. Year after year, we were either number one or number two, and I think in some years number three, but either the number one, number two, or number three best place to work or top workplace in the Pacific Northwest. Some of the awards are behind me. In total, I think we had 16 total awards, and it was year after year after year. And it was really tied to this idea of culture creation, making sure people understood those culture characteristics, making sure that we celebrated the positive outcomes that came from us acting and operating that way. That was a huge part of the success at shaping the culture. And you could feel it. It was different. People actually wanted to act these ways because it was celebrated and it was positive, and they could see the positive outcomes, right? And it was mostly focused on things that we knew would create a positive outcome. So we shied away from or stayed away from things like financial stewardship or financial responsibility or anything tied to money. Like, we decided as a company, we don't really want to focus on the money stuff. We want to focus on the people and the culture characteristics that are more the soft skills, more the be kind, be caring, understand, make things simple, work hard, the things that people could actually actively do, and we could more easily connect that to a positive outcome. Nothing wrong with you writing down your own culture characteristics, and they can absolutely be financially driven. It just wasn't something that we focused on as a company. We did 12 because I wanted to connect one to each month, and I wanted to spend the entire month of January talking about care. I wanted to spend the entire month of February talking about understanding, and that's just the way that I did it. But other organizations do it differently. Sometimes you'll have 4 culture characteristics and you'll just kind of like mix them up as you go along throughout the year, talking about each one in different meetings. Other times you'll have 6 or whatever the right number is for you. There's not any particular one right way, if you will, but we did 12. It worked out really well, and it certainly shifted things within our organization. Turnover went from around 40% turnover to 0% turnover for the last 4 years that I was the CEO at that company. I should probably repeat that. I run into executives all the time and they're like, huh? So we were at about 40% turnover. It was stupid high. It was really bad. I really started focusing on our people, culture, and just really listening and making changes based on their feedback, as well as putting positively in there as like a encouragement. Hey, here's how we want to operate and act as a company. And our turnover steadily dropped over the course of about 2 years. And for the last 4 years that I was the CEO of the company, we had 0% voluntary turnover. In other words, we had 0% of people actually quit. We did have some turnover, but it was different situations. I'll let you fill in the gaps on that. But so it really did work to build culture at our organization. Now, there was another part to this which ties into Amazing Workplace. For some of you know, I'm founder and CEO of Amazing Workplace. The thing that we successfully did was the surveys that we did each year, and we actually did 2 a year. We did one every 6 months, and even though the surveys themselves were not great, like the questions that were being asked, we did like a deep dive. We're like, not the best for us. The awards were nice because you got the recognition, and that was kind of a benefit for having participated. And at the time, the finance group, the chief financial officer, didn't want to spend a lot of money, so it was a cost-effective way to do the surveys because it was free to do them. We got great awards, and then we paid for the results, and that was, I don't know, a few $1,000s a year. And then we spent hours having to like Excel files, put together information to then create some meaningful data that we could use to make things better. It was so much time. So that activity is what led to the creation of Amazing Workplace. First and foremost, the focus was on something called engagement, which none of our people understood, and most people don't even understand what engagement is. Coupled with the fact that the creator of engagement has gone on record and said that what he created and wrote about has just been completely changed, made not effective. I'm paraphrasing. I think the exact words were violently and fundamentally different than what he had in his mind when he wrote about this stuff. There's an interview. You can look it up. So engagement was not really something I wanted to focus on because it wasn't the outcome I wanted. I didn't want my people to be engaged at work. I didn't care about the questions that are being asked tied to engagement. I didn't care whether or not somebody would recommend us to a friend or colleague. I didn't care. I mean, that's a nice thing to have. But what I cared about was that people came to work happy and wanting to be productive and really enthusiastic about the things that they were doing. And engagement didn't get me there. So I shifted our focus towards happiness. Like, were people happy or not? And happy simply means a feeling very glad. That word, the sort of Rome, Italy thing. Obviously, people were happy before Rome, Italy. But if you go and you look up the history of that word, what's called the etymology or the history of the word, you'll find that the first use of that, at least according to the Romans, was around 12 to 1300s, and it directly translated to a feeling of feeling very glad. Now, about 300 years later, the word satisfaction got created, and that directly translated in Rome, Italy, to a feeling of having enough. Not the same ideas, right? Those two ideas have been mushed together, or what's called conflated. You're taking two separate definitions and you're squishing them together and you're conflating them into one. That's not actually what satisfaction doesn't mean. Happiness doesn't mean satisfaction. So anyway, all that aside, I wanted to focus on happiness. Like, how do we create an environment where people look forward to coming to work and they feel very glad coming to work? So I used those surveys in order to gather information, went through all the stuff, met with the executives, and then every 6 months we would sit down together as a company and we would walk through first the things that we were doing really well. And that was all about celebrating the successful result of our team. We would talk with them about how their behavior, how their interaction with one another, their commitment to one another, all of their hard work resulted in these positive outcomes. And we would really celebrate the highest scores of the things that were broken down by the survey, right? And then adjacent to that, we would make time to go through candidly the things that we weren't doing well. And I would own those. And that's a really important distinction. The good stuff, that's all about celebrating your people. They helped make that outcome happen. They contributed positively to those positive outcomes. The stuff that people aren't happy about, well, my viewpoint, that's on leadership. That's on me as the CEO at the time for not having found out about this stuff and tackled it or handled it, right? So we would get the list of the things that weren't great. And early on, they were not great. There was also a lot of like direct comments about me personally, which I fortunately didn't take personally. Sometimes it was rough, but I just decided, hey, I'm on a journey, and the journey is to make our workplace amazing, where people look forward to coming to work, where people don't want to quit and go someplace else. And I just need to kind of like put up with the fact that I've probably done things that have upset people, and I need to not take it personally in order to get through this journey, if you will, or get to the other side of where I'm trying to get to. So so I had to throw a lot of those emotions into the trash can and just own it, and not make excuses for the things that were being communicated either about me or about the company. Not take it personally. And that was a really hard thing to do, but it was really important as part of that evolution from not a great workplace to an amazing workplace, high turnover to low turnover. I just I needed to own it, right? So we would get with the teams and we would go through the things that we were going to get done based on their feedback. And we did this every 6 months. And then as we got things done, we would let the company know, hey, if you remember, we did that survey back in January, and this change we're making right now, we're dropping these meetings off the schedule. One of the pieces of feedback is we're having way too many meetings. Big surprise. That's a pretty common piece of feedback. So we're dropping these off the schedule, and we're doing that because you asked us to. And thank you for letting us know about that. And thank you for speaking up and letting us know that that was something that you wanted. And this all of this activity started to increase this feeling of safety. And that's a really key, important part of any successful organization, is creating an environment where people feel safe to speak up, creating an environment where people feel safe to say, hey, I don't really like this. And the more safe that people feel, the better feedback you're going to get, the more valuable, actual, real, heartfelt feedback that you're going to get. Now, it doesn't mean you need to act on every piece of feedback, because sometimes the feedback you're getting maybe isn't aligned with where you're headed as an organization, or sometimes the feedback that you're getting is maybe through the lens of one person, and it doesn't maybe match like the majority, if you will. You have a person that comes in and says everybody needs to wear purple every day, and everyone else at work is like, well, we don't like purple at all. It's a silly example, but you get the idea. So but still, making it safe and making it valuable for people, to making them feel valuable, I should say, for providing that feedback, so important. Fast forward to Amazing Workplace, what was created in the software, and it was kind of that activity that I did for almost a decade, was the birthplace of, there's got to be a better way to get feedback. There's got to be a better way to put this information together in a usable format to drive the culture that we want to create as an organization, to drive the outcomes that we want to create, whether that's reduced turnover, whether that's increased productivity, or whether it's recruiting, right? And all of these things, recruiting, productivity, retention, which all connect to your people, right? All of these things are positively influenced by happiness, not necessarily so much by engagement. And let me explain. When's the last time that you applied for a job because you heard their engagement scores were high? We'll just take a moment on that one. Never. When's the last time you quit and went out and grabbed a beer with a friend and said, yeah, I quit because our engagement scores were really low? And when's the last time that you came to work and you were actually more productive because you would recommend your workplace to a friend or colleague? So if we know that recruiting, productivity, and retention are the key to success within an organization, we know that ties to our people. Why are we measuring something? Why are we focusing on something that has no meaningful impact on recruiting, productivity, or retention? So I knew there had to be a better way, and I knew that I had successfully done this in my organization to drive recruiting. Was a waiting list of applicants. Productivity was through the roof. We got more done with a 12-person legal research team than a competitor did with a 100-person research team, and that is not made up. In fact, that company bought our company. And then the last piece, which is retention, the 0% turnover speaks for itself. So I knew there had to be a better way, which is focusing on employee happiness. But the problem is how do you measure happiness? It doesn't actually work to just walk up and say, hey, how do you feel? You can get a like a snapshot of how a person feels in a moment. And of course, if they're being honest with you, you can understand how they feel. But how do you gather information meaningfully to understand how a person feels at work tied to the things that matter most to them? So that took us on this like long journey, and it was about a 4-year journey of research going back to the 1900s, looking at what are the key things that people care most about at work. What are the things that drive that feeling of very glad, or let's just kind of take it up the scale. Like they're not very happy, they're not in any way remotely satisfied, they don't even feel like they have enough, up to like feeling like they have enough. And there's a lot of research on satisfaction, because satisfaction has been measured for I think now 50 years. So satisfaction is like, we've got that dialed in terms of, do people have what they need or want? And there's tons of questions tied to that. There's tons of research on job demands and resource demands, and whether or not people have what they need or want. So we had that body of research available to us. And then we really started diving into like, how do you find out how a person really feels? And the more that we did the research, the more that we had all of our experts looking at this stuff, and software engineers and design teams, what we landed on was just a human conversation. Because truly, if you think about it, it's in those moments where we're talking with a friend that we're able to get the person to open up and share with us how they really feel. It's in those moments where the person is able to share what's going on, positively or negatively, that we get a sense of how a person feels. So we knew we needed to get away from scores. We needed to get away from numbers. Pre-World War II, companies were measuring how their people felt through conversations. Hauser and Associates and other behavioral psychologists at the time had really dialed in the value of talking with people, making sure that they understood what they were there to talk about, and gathering that information through a live communication. Rensis Lickert and about 20% of the behavioral psychologists in the US were hired by the federal government during World War II to measure how people felt during the war. And in an effort to simplify the gathering of that information, entered in scores, numbers, surveys, Rensis Lickert's scale. It's pronounced Lickert, not Likert. The strongly agree, neither agree nor disagree, strongly disagree, and a number of other metrics or measurements that were added into the gathering of information. And ever since that moment, things have kind of been a little off track, right? So we knew we had to go back to like, how do we get a person to open up through more of a dialogue? So we created a conversation system, and it interacts with people like a conversation would enter. It's a conversation. Yeah. Question is asked, the person answers it. There's an acknowledgement or a response. It looks a bit like a text program. I know we're adding videos as part of the enhancements that we're doing, but right now it looks and feels like you're having a text conversation with somebody, right? And it's really nice because it opens people up and it makes them feel heard, acknowledged, and it's a lot more interactive and fun to do. And it opens with, hey, here's what we're here to talk about. And we researched out the 10 topics, or the 10 categories, or topics is probably the right word, that people care most about at work. Sure, there's some variation between different organizations and what people care most about in one company or industry than another. But when you look at the research that's been done for 100 years, you can distill it down, or shrink it down, or filter it out to about 10 topics that really matter to people. So those 10 topics are introduced, meaning that we start with like, hey, we'd love to talk to you about your job, the work that you do every day, at work, the tasks, the things that you do. How do you feel about work? Just like a conversation that you would have with a friend. If you were hanging out after work and you say, hey, how are things going at work? And they would tell you how things are going at work. And you'd say, well, how do you feel about like overall, like, I don't know, happiness, like very happy. And they would share with you how they felt, right? And now you've captured how they feel about that topic. Now you also want to find out why they feel that way, both positively and negatively. And this is where the real value in this conversation platform exists, because we're not just capturing how a person feels about a topic. So we have 10 feelings that we capture. We're also finding out why they feel happy, if they feel happy. We're also finding out what would make them feel happier if they don't yet feel happy. So the conversation system captures both sides topically. Let me explain. I ask you about your job, and you say, yeah, I actually really love the stuff that I do at work. I love what I do. I love my tasks and everything else. That's amazing. Why do you feel happy about that? Like, well, I feel meaning in it. Da, 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 da. They go through all this stuff. And then at the tail end of that, I asked them, what do you think would make others feel happier about that? So now we're talking to a happy person who's shared with us why they're happy. And we're crowdsourcing from those happy people what they believe would improve happiness for this topic. Super valuable. Then in the opposite, if I talk to that same person or a different person, I say, hey, how do you feel about their job? And like, I'm miserable. I hate this. It's the worst. This place sucks, right? So they're very unhappy. Sorry to hear that. What would make you feel happier about your job? And then we capture what would make them feel happier about their job. And then at the tail end of that, we ask them, what, if anything, do you feel happy about tied to your job? So again, we're crowdsourcing both sides from the happy individuals, people that feel happy about these topics, as well as from the people that don't yet feel happy about these topics. And we go through this just step by step by step by step by step. And the end result is amazing because we've got 10 individually stored feelings about these topics. And we know from every person what they feel happy about, even the unhappy person, what, if anything, do you feel happy about, as well as what they believe would make them or others feel happier for every single topic, which is super valuable because now it removes the scoring. It removes the guesswork. We have a clear picture of exactly how many people say that that's what would make people feel happier. Yeah. If we had better job descriptions, if I had a clearer understanding of my career path, I would feel happier about the subject of my future at this company or growth opportunities at this company. And there's no more ambiguity. There's no more black box scoring or like 7.2 is that really that bad? Well, let's benchmark it against others and see what others, well, we're higher than others, so we don't really need to focus on this. Like, oh my gosh, gang, this is not the right approach to your people. The right approach to your people is to find out what they feel happy about, what they don't feel happy about, and then why. And it's the why that lets us know what to do next. It's the why that opens up the door to us being able to create a more positive outcome in our workplace, a more positive culture, one that they feel rewards their feedback, one that they feel actually listens to what they're saying, because we're not sitting there arguing or debating whether a 7.2 is bad or good and whether it rises to the level of action. It's just ridiculous. I mean, I've lived through this in multiple organizations, and it really is silly. So all of that's really, really neat. But this is where the magic happens. And it's the thing I'm most excited about the platform is at the end of this conversation, we have a moment just like you'd have with a friend. We're talking for, I don't know, say 30 minutes about work. And we're talking about your job and your work and your career. We're talking about meaning at work and how inspired you are and whether you're really aligned with the company's purpose. We're talking about the products and services, how you treat people, all these different component parts about work and what matters to people at work. And then at the tail end of that conversation, because I'm with you, I have a sense, I have a feeling, an opinion about how I believe you feel because I've seen your facial expressions. I've heard the words that you're saying. We've had a whole conversation about what you feel happy about or not. And in that moment, just like any conversation with a friend, we will sort of assumptively, we will assume or we will throw out verbally to the person, hey, sounds like you're pretty happy at work. Is that right? And in that moment, the person you're talking to is able to reflect on the conversation and say, yeah, that's right. Or they're able to reflect on the conversation and say, no, that's not right. What we didn't talk about was this, and I'm really not happy overall. And the beauty of that last moment, of that happiness verification, is that we're capturing how the person actually feels after being given an opportunity to see how the answers they've given would, air quotes, score them. So through our system, we're looking at every single piece of feedback, right, for the 10 topics. And at the tail end, the system looking at everything they've done, the responses, the unique comments, the selections they've made. It doesn't give them a score, but what the platform does in that little text conversation, it says, hey, it sounds like overall you feel happy at work or whatever the feeling is. Is that right? Based on the responses. Like if somebody's unhappy all the way down, lots of negative comments, the system's going to say, hey, sounds like you often feel unhappy at work. Is that right? or if it's happy, 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 or a mixture, maybe it's satisfied. Satisfied, is that right? And in that moment, the person's looking at that communication from the system, and they can change how they are perceived to be felt to match how they really feel. So the perception or the idea is that you feel very happy, but the reality is the person is only satisfied, and they can change it to satisfied, and then they tell you why. So now you have 10 stored values of feeling. You know why people are happy, what would make them feel happier. And at the tail end of this, you have a verified happiness feeling, which is not a collection of scores or we're not crowdsourcing how they felt about the things we asked them about. We're actually presenting them, hey, if we were to crowdsource what you just said, it looks like you feel happy, but is that right? And we're getting a verified feeling, which is a completely unique way to approach how people feel at work. We're the only company that does this. We own the registered trademark on employee happiness, and we're the only company that has the technology to do this effectively. And the result is magical. Because what I now know with 100% confidence is how my people feel. I'm not collecting a bunch of questions that they may or may not care about and scoring them on a 1 to 5 scale or on a 0 to 100 scale, and then looking at those people and saying, well, a 72 is not that bad. And then when I benchmark those results against other people, it's actually much higher. I'm not doing that. I'm actually finding out how people feel, and even more importantly, why they feel that way and what I can do to improve happiness or to maintain the high levels of happiness if I've achieved those with my people. Bringing that full circle back to my company and the culture creation that we did, this exercise of focusing on happiness, which is something that we did back then. We didn't have the technology I just described, but we did focus on happiness, and we did use the results to figure out how to do what I just described using all the information that we got through the surveys. It absolutely resulted in a waiting list of applicants, job applicants for recruiting. Our productivity was through the roof. We got way more done than anybody else. And our retention was amazing. Turnover went to 0% for the last 4 years that I ran that company. So for those that are doubters or are not sure, like, well, we're really just in bed with engagement, I would encourage you to take a look at a different way to do this, a better way to do this, a way to do this in a platform that lets you walk into the platform and to know how many people are happy. There's a group over there, and how many people are not yet happy. And why aren't these people yet happy? What can I do to fix that? Oh, 76% of these people say that they would feel happier about growth opportunities if I wrote job descriptions. Sounds like that's the next thing to do, right? That's the simplicity of this platform, is it really just brings to the table clearly in a very easy to understand and then implement way how people feel, why they feel that way. Anyway, that was a huge part of our success in driving culture, was focusing. The first part was all about understanding culture, communicating that to our people. Core values or characteristics was the second part. But the nail in the coffin that like really put all this to rest was that we started to ask our people how they felt. We made time to really understand why they felt that way. And then we took action to improve it. And we did that very collaboratively, celebrating the good things that we were doing as a group and validating the company and the people within it for those good things. And then taking ownership of those things that we had not yet done that they wanted us to do. And it absolutely works. And it's not just because I've got, I think at this point, something like over 20 top workplace awards for the companies that I've run. That's not the why. It's evidence that it works, but it's not why I did it or why we did it. Why we did it is because we want people to show up to work excited to work every day. We want people to warmly smile when they come to work or to really, enjoy working with one another. We want to hear laughter in the office, not silence in meetings. And these are the things that we were, really wanting to achieve. And these were the we had this list of characteristics that we were working on as well. These are the outcomes that we wanted to create within our organization. And if you make time to really just simplify culture, explain it to your people, hey, it's how others would describe how we act as a group. If you make time to write down, which is really important, how you'd like that to look, like what do we want people to say about our company when they interact with us, whether those are customers or coworkers or people that come in to our offices or just interact with us, right? And then finding a way to meaningfully measure how your people feel. And I'm just going to go on record and say this. If you're using engagement, you're missing the mark. There's so much research out there on this. And if you just make time to look at what are the questions that make up your engagement score, you might be shocked to find out that those questions don't matter at all to your people. They don't care about those things that are being asked. What they care about is somebody listening to their feedback that they've given to you and making time to make it safe for them to continue to give feedback by thanking them for it and taking action based on that feedback. And there's a lot of platforms that promote what I just said, because that's the recipe for success: is listen to your people, find things that you can do based on their feedback, and then go do them. That recipe is as old as time, and it just works, whether it's in a personal relationship or it's a work relationship. That really does work well. But when you go to take action, when you go to get back with your people and say, hey, sounds like y'all feel this way, and you're using tools that have collected information based on questions that don't matter to your people, they're collecting information about engagement that nobody cares about. What often happens is the things that we do aren't really the things that matter most to our people. So through a conversation system that really teases out conversationally how people feel, why they feel that way, really confirms and validates how they feel, which engagement scores do not do. You get a total score based on a bunch of questions they've answered. You have the 13 questions that are done by Gallup that are their core index or like measurement. If somebody answers those questions, strongly agree, or agree, it looks like their engagement scores are really high, but it doesn't mean that they're happy. It doesn't mean that they actually enjoy coming to work. It doesn't mean that they actually have shared with you what are the things that would make things better at work. And that's why focusing on employee happiness is so much different than focusing on engagement. Anyhow, I've probably gone over this enough at this point, and I'll sign off. But hopefully this was helpful, and go create great cultures.